Hello, this is Albrecht Koppenhofer, Turfgrass entomologist, Rutgers University. For this 2020 virtual Turfgrass field day, Rutgers University, I will talk to you about monitoring annual bluegrass weevil, ABW adults. In the first part of the presentation, we will talk about currently used methods. Everybody is probably aware that ABW is a very difficult to control pest of golf courses throughout the Northeast. Some people apply up to 10 or even more applications of insecticides per year. Obviously, that can result over time in some serious resistance problems. To avoid that, we want to minimize applications both in space and in time through good monitoring. ABW adults, and we're talking mostly about the overwintered ones in spring that start the whole season. They overwinter outside of the playing surfaces in this first 1-2 inches of soil, under taller grass, under tree litter, around trees, even in roughs. And you can see here how in typically late October we try to extract these from such overwintering sites. Now these adults migrate over a period of time to these playing surfaces because, well, their migration is affected by variable spring temperatures. They converge from different overwintering sites, which maybe warm up at different speeds. And there might be more than one peak in adult densities because cool temperatures might interrupt the migration process. And because it's very cool during spring, the migration happens primarily on foot. One way to predict activities of these insects is the phenology of indicator plants. In particular, forsythia is very well used. Basically, when forsythia reaches full bloom, that's when overwintering adults become active, and then throughout the full bloom period, they migrate to the playing surfaces. And you can see the photo, a nice full bloom forsythia. Now, when forsythias reach the stage of being about half gold, half green, when they leaf out, that's typically when peak adult densities are reached on the playing surfaces. And this is then the best time to spray against these overwintered adults because at that time they have not really started laying eggs yet. But as you can see in the photograph, we have one that's about half green on the left side here, forsythia plant, and right next to it there is one that is almost completely, at least 90% green. So you need to look at the big picture throughout an area to determine when actually this time is. Other plants that can be used as indicator plants are flowering dogwood and eastern redbud. And these indicate when they're in full bloom, when egg laying has begun. And at this point, because the adulticides that most insecticides actually don't affect these eggs, that's when these adulticides become ineffective. Now, another way of predicting activities are degree-day models. They can be used to predict the activities as well as for fine-tuned treatment timing. We typically use, and we do this for ABW, development threshold temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So then we calculate the degree-day units for each individual day by adding up the minimum temperature plus the maximum temperature and divide the sum by 2. And from that sum, we then subtract the developmental or threshold temperature. Then we add up the average growing degree units we get for each day, and we get growing degree day accumulation. Note that since insects don't develop backwards, there's never going to be any negative values, so the smallest you can have is 0. Here we can see how these growing degree day units accumulate. So you see the dates in the left column, and then we see the maximum temperature, minimum temperatures in the next columns, the total of the two, the average divided by 2 there. And then when we subtract 50, so the threshold temperature, that's the individual for each day values we get, And then in the very right column, you see how they accumulate over time. Now, an easier way, well, one can do this by, keeping track of these values using a weather station on a golf course and then calculate these values. It's actually much easier if one purchases one of these weather trackers, as you see on a photograph here. And then if you set them correctly with a threshold temperature, start date, which for Weevils is typically March 1, then they will calculate these growing degree day units and their accumulation for you. Here we see many, many years of data summarized to show when on average what stage of plant or ABW is reached at what growing degree day unit and the range thereof. Obviously that's varies between years to some extent. So for example, on top we see forsythia full bloom happens on average when 46 growing degree day units base 50 are reached, but then it's going to happen at a range between 23 and 69 units. And forsythia reaches the half gold, half green stage at 158 growing degree day units, and that can happen in a range of about 130 to 210. And you see then for a whole bunch of other plant stages or insect stages, other values that can be useful. But here we're talking about adults, so let's ignore these other values for now. Another way to monitor adult activity, but that also doesn't give you really densities, are these linear pitfall traps. You can see at the bottom there is one of these PVC pipes with slit cut in the top, so then you dig them, put them into the ground at ground level so that adults that march across this fall into the slits, and they end up at the one end with a bigger section there where they can be then removed and counted regularly. Another way is looking at grass clippings, because in fact mowers pick up a lot of these adults, and so if you get peak adult numbers in your clippings, when you go through them, you can see the adults down there in the clippings on the right side. When they reach peak numbers, then obviously you will also have peak adult densities out in the entire area. And that would be then, if necessary, the time to apply an adulticide. However, you have to be aware that many of these adults survive this mowing process, and many of them even without any injury. So if you would discard the clippings right next to your green, guess what? They would just go right back to business. So you need to discard them somewhere far away or even somehow destroy them. One more method here is vacuuming. So you have a leaf blower, you invert the air intake so that it sucks up debris and adults into a sieve basket that you insert into the inlet of the leaf blower. The best time to do this then is between forsythia full bloom and half gold, half green, so that you then you do this maybe at least once a week, and you can observe then how the densities over time accumulate. And then you can empty them onto a tray like the guy at the bottom there is doing, and then count the adults. Be aware that they fake to be dead at the beginning, and then especially if it's cooler, and take a little while then to warm up. But once they start moving, with a little practice, they're fairly easy to see. So here, for example, you can see the grass clippings on a tray, ideally a light colored tray, so that the dark adults stick out a little bit more. So what you could do, for example, is here you can, on 5 collars that have problems with ABW in your greens, you could take 5 back samples of about 20 seconds. That should be consistent. Once per week, you should do that, when it's warmer, consistent time of day, 11 o'clock, for example. And then that whole process would take about 40 minutes, and it will give you an idea what's going on. One more method you can use here is disclosing our irritant solution. So we use normally lemon-scented liquid dishwashing detergent at about half a fluid ounce per gallon, which is 0.4% solution. We take 1 pint of that, so about 500 ml, and spread that over a square foot area. And that irritates the adults to the surface onto the grass blades. And you have to take multiple samples throughout an area since they're obviously not uniformly distributed. And we find generally that this is the most precise and consistent method that's least affected by weather conditions. But you need to be aware that you need to irrigate that with an equivalent amount of water afterwards to wash the soap into the ground so that on a hot sunny days it would not scald the grass. So overall, you have to use regular growing degree day and or plant phenology observations to predict activities, both of the insect, ABW, and for yourself, so when you should be spraying or monitoring. You can use sampling methods like vacuuming, clippings, or soap flushes to determine the need for applications, and also then fine-tune the proper timing of the adulticide applications. However, ideally you should always use multiple methods to really get this down. If you're looking for some more information, you can look at my webpage at Rutgers Entomology and look at extension presentations I have on there as well as publications. And if you still have questions, of course you can email me, or give me a call. Thank you very much for your attention.